USPAP page 146. Advisory Opinion 28 continued. Determining and performing the scope of work. USPAP recognizes that the appropriate scope of work may differ significantly for different assignments. The scope of work rule provides flexibility in determining the scope of work. The competency necessary to determine an appropriate scope of work within the allowed flexibility resides with the appraiser. Therefore, while it is common for the client to provide input to the appraiser regarding a desired scope of work, the responsibility for determining the appropriate scope of work resides with the appraiser. The flexibility and responsibility are linked in the scope of work rule when it states, appraisers have broad flexibility and significant responsibility in determining the appropriate scope of work for an appraisal or appraisal review assignment. The responsibility is described when the scope of work rule states, the appraiser must be prepared to demonstrate that the scope of work is sufficient to produce credible assignment results. The client, for example, might request that the appraiser include or exclude specific inspections, data collection, or analysis in the scope of work. The appraiser may accept an assignment with these types of assignment conditions, provided that the assignment results are credible in the context of the intended use. The scope of work rule addresses this issue in the scope of work acceptability section. An appraiser must not allow assignment conditions to limit the scope of work to such a degree that the assignment results are not credible in the context of the intended use. An appraiser must not allow the intended use of an assignment or a client's objectives to cause the assignment results to be biased. Determining the appropriate scope of work requires judgment. This judgment rests on the appraiser's identification of the assignment elements and understanding of what is required to solve the identified problem. In many assignments, experienced appraisers are able to make this judgment about the appropriate scope of work quickly because they have performed many assignments addressing a similar problem to be solved. Assignment with similar assignment elements. In other assignments, the determination of the appropriate scope of work may require more analysis by the appraiser because the problem to be solved has certain unusual characteristics. In yet other assignments, the appraiser may begin with a planned scope of work, but in the course of the assignment find that the planned scope of work must be modified in order to produce credible assignment results. The scope of work rule recognizes that the scope of work actually performed may differ from the scope of work initially planned when it states, determining the scope of work is an ongoing process in an assignment. Information or conditions discovered during the course of an assignment might cause the appraiser to reconsider the scope of work. Disclosing the scope of work performed. The scope of work rule explains that proper disclosure of the scope of work is required because clients and other intended users rely on the assignment results. The rule also states that the report must contain sufficient information to allow intended users to understand the scope of work performed. An appraiser must disclose research and analysis not performed when such disclosure is necessary for intended users to understand the report properly and not be misled. 3 disclosure requirements apply to the scope of work performed rather than the scope of work initially planned by the appraiser. The appraiser must disclose the type and extent of research and analysis that were actually completed in the development process. Additionally, the information required to allow intended users to understand the scope of work may include disclosure of research and analysis not performed. There is no requirement for the scope of work description to be in a particular or separate section of the report. Page 147, Advisory Opinion 28 continued. Illustrations. Number 1. A real property appraiser is engaged to appraise the market value of a 12-unit apartment building. The appraiser initially decided that the scope of work should include the inspection of 2 of each of the 3 unit types. For instance, studio, 1 and 2 bedroom. In the course of conducting the inspection, the property manager had a key for only 1 of the 2 bedroom units. Thus, the appraiser was not able to inspect 1 of the 2 bedrooms units as planned. The scope of work, which includes the degree of inspection, was affected in this assignment because of lack of access. If the appraiser decides that she has sufficient information to produce credible assignment results, the appraiser can complete the appraisal based on the inspection completed. The report would include a description of the scope of work performed, stating that 5 units had been inspected. Number 2, a personal property appraiser was engaged to appraise 4 sets of china. The intended use of the report was for litigation regarding an estate. The client requested that all pieces of each set of china be inspected. Since one cause of action claimed that several pieces were damaged, when the appraiser contacted the estate's administrator to arrange for inspection, he was told that 1 set of china was in storage and could not be retrieved until after the court's deadline for the submission of expert reports. In this case, assignment conditions have changed the appraiser's scope of work. The appraiser may not have sufficient information to produce credible assignment results in the context of the intended use. The appraiser should consult with the client on the proper course of action. The appraiser may alter the scope of work to include the appraisal of only the 3 sets of china available for inspection or use, an extraordinary assumption regarding the condition of the 4th set. Number 3, a business appraiser is appraising a closely held business enterprise with real property and personal property assets. In the course of the assignment, the appraiser's research indicates that the market for the company's product is declining and management's projections are not supported. Therefore, the appraiser believes the company might be worth more in liquidation than as a going concern, which would make performance of the work addressed in Standards Rule 9-3 necessary for credible assignment results. The scope of work must be modified because of what the appraiser learned in the course of performing research and analysis. Number 4, a real property appraiser is contacted by a potential client to appraise an occupied manufacturing facility. The client requests that the occupants not be disturbed by a property inspection. Additionally, the client requests that the cost approach be performed in the appraisal of the building. These requests are assignment conditions and will be part of the appraiser's identification of the problem to be solved and determination of the appropriate scope of work. Accepting and completing this assignment requires the appraiser to determine that the client's assignment conditions do not limit the scope of work to such a degree that assignment results are not credible in the context of the intended use. Gather information on relevant characteristics by means other than inspection and/or use extraordinary assumptions. Include a cost approach in the scope of work, even if this approach is not otherwise necessary for credible assignment results. And properly reconcile the applicability or suitability of the cost approach in arriving at the value conclusion. Number 5, a real property appraiser accepted an assignment to appraise a 3-unit residential property. The intended use of the appraisal was for mortgage financing. The client requested that the appraiser not verify the legal status, for instance, compliance with zoning, building codes, use permits of the 3 units with municipal officials. The appraiser withdrew from the assignment because she concluded that the client's assignment condition limited the scope of work to such a degree that assignment results would not be credible in the context of the intended use. The use of an extraordinary assumption about the legal use of the property would not produce credible assignment results in the context of the mortgage financing use.